Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Pacifica Graduate Institute. My name is Dave Odoricio. I'm the director of our retreat center here at Pacifica, and I'm also associate core faculty in our Mythological Studies MA PhD program. Diane Travis-Teague, who's the director of our Alumni Association, has generously invited me to moderate and preside over this evening's event, so I'm very happy to be here. It's a real pleasure to welcome back and introduce Graig Titley and his friends, who we'll meet later this evening. A little bit about Graig. Graig is a film and television writer and producer who began his film career in the Hollywood trenches as a production assistant. After a brief stint as an executive for Nickelodeon's feature film division, Graig went on to become a successful writer of family films, including the live-action ScoobyDoo, Cheaper by the Dozen, and Percy Jackson and the Olympians' The Lightning Thief. Many of these clips you've just seen playing here tonight. Titley's films have grossed nearly $1 billion in worldwide box office. In television, Graig worked with George Lucas and Lucasfilm Animation, penning episodes of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and was a writer-producer on the NBC superhero series The Cape. Graig is currently a writer and executive producer on Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Graig is a graduate of Eastern Illinois University, received his MFA from USC's Peter Stark program, and is currently completing his PhD in Mythological Studies here at Pacifica. So the order of events for this evening is Graig is going to speak for a little bit until he feels good about that. Good now. Okay. Graig's not going to speak. He's good now. And then he and I are going to do a little bit of a Q&A dialogue, and then we're going to invite his friends up this evening, and there are three, who will be revealed momentarily. And then we'll do a bit of a panel and conversation around imagination and creativity. So before that, please welcome Graig Titley.
Yay. Thank you. Well, I guess we should talk about why I'm here and what brought me here, which is this magical place, Pacifica Graduate Institute, which when I was in the Myth program, we called it Hogwarts, because the journey up here was always magical and met a lot of great friends. And what brought me ultimately to Pacifica, it feels like a thing that was meant to be and was supposed to happen eventually in my life. But I grew up just as a nerdy kid who was obsessed with comic books, television, movies, and knew at a very young age I wanted to be a writer, work in the film business somehow, some way. And so from a very young age, I was sort of driven in that direction, always just working my imagination, writing stories at ridiculously young ages. I think my first professional gig was, everybody remember Twinkies and the Hostess snacks? Yeah, great stuff, thank you. When I was 9 years old, I concocted this story I wrote about how King Ding Dong was kidnapped. And so Twinkie the Kid had to get Fruit Pie the Magician and all these other guys together to go save King Ding Dong. And I wrote it, and then my parents sent it to the Hostess company, found the address. 6 weeks later, I'm 9 years old, and this big box arrives, and it was boxes of Twinkies and Ding Dongs. And when you're 9 years old, I'm like, I have discovered, it was alchemy. It was like, I have discovered the secret of life. I can write stories, and people will send me Twinkies and Ding Dongs. So I saw a future in this. I still get paid in Twinkies and Ding Dongs. I'm really broke right now. No, but anyway, so I've just always wanted to tell stories. And undergrad, I went to Eastern Illinois University. We didn't have a film school, so I sort of built my own film degree. So I'm like, all right, what's film? It's art and commerce. It's stories and commerce. So I'm going to get an English lit degree and a business degree simultaneously that have no overlap. So I basically had no life for 4 years because I had to take 6 classes a year or a semester, 3 every summer in order to get these degrees. And from there, my trajectory was in, I want to get in the USC Film School, the best film school in the world, ostensibly. Got accepted there in the producing program. Thought, wow, once you graduate from the Peter Stark producing program, you basically, somebody gives you an office in Beverly Hills, you hang up a sign that says Graig Titley producer, and Tom Cruise walks in and is like, so I hear you're producing movies now. Doesn't work that way. I ended up getting coffee for people as a PA. All the time, writing stories, and finally sold my first script, didn't get made. But from that first script, it got in the hands of a director, Chris Columbus, who directed the first 2 Harry Potter movies, Home Alone movies, Mrs. Doubtfire, kind of a big deal. And he sort of mentored me, gave me a 2-picture deal at his office. And out of that, Cheaper by the Dozen was one of the movies that got made. But I was writing, I got sort of pigeonholed writing family films. The renowned C-Spot Run, starring David Arquette, Leslie Bibb, a dog, Michael Clark Duncan, and a zebra that farted. That was my trajectory. And then I wrote Cheaper by the Dozen. So I was writing all these family films, but I was a Marvel comic book guy. I wanted to do these deeper films, bigger films, so many other things I wanted to write. So I had to shake myself out of this, because once you get typecast, as Luke will tell you, it's hard to escape from this. And so I just wanted to become a deeper writer somehow, but I didn't know what that was going to tell. And then I came to Santa Barbara because there was this celebration for Joseph Campbell's 100th birthday. This was, how long ago was that? That was a while ago. Joseph Campbell right there. Now, the one thing every Hollywood executive has on their desk, they have 2 books. They have the 48 Rules of Power, which turns them all into like jerks. And then they have The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, which they proudly display and have probably never read. But what they have read is the Chris Vogler book for screenwriters, The Writer's Journey, where he translates Campbell's work into something simple for screenwriters to read. So I was a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and I think most writers in Hollywood are, because of the legend that it was Hero with a Thousand Faces that inspired George Lucas when he was writing his original Star Wars series. So it's kind of like, this guy has the secret to storytelling. So I came to that, and I realized that it was being put on by this place I'd never heard of called Pacifica Graduate Institute. And, oh, they have a PhD program in mythological studies. So that felt like the magic ingredient that I've been looking for, just to immerse myself in stories and mythology. So I came here with the goal to make myself a better, deeper, smarter writer. Whether it worked or not, you can be the judge of later things, but I feel like it worked. I like my writing so much better. It's so much more interesting now. It's opened a lot of doors that weren't open before. I get into the Marvel world, which, whatever you may think of Marvel movies, they're very mythic on a lot of scales. I mean, I think it's modern mythology, this sort of Marvel world, as are many comic books. So that's sort of the value of Pacifica to me. Now, there were kind of 3 Pacificas. And at first, I got 2 of them, and I didn't understand the 3rd one. This is the Mythology program. There were the people that were there purely to study story, basically, narratology. Like, you want to read myths and hear all these great stories. That was part of me, because the more of these stories I could absorb, the more better writer I could be. Then were sort of the academics that wanted to treat it like the Mythic Studies program. And then there was the side that was sort of your life as a mythic journey, soul tending, self-improvement, self-awareness. And at first I resisted that part. I'm like, this is a PhD program. There can't be drum circles. Put your crayons away. You guys know what I'm talking about. But I found that became a big part of my life as well, as I realized just serendipitous things that happen along the way, that we all are on this mythic journey. And so you can have the academic portion of it, but you also need to sort of open up yourself to this mythic journey we're on and absorbing stuff we'll get into a lot of that later. But that's sort of the value of Pacifica and how I ended up here, and why I think it was a extremely valuable program for me on a lot of levels, on a personal level, on a writing level. It took my career into a completely different level because my writing, I think, improved. And now I became sort of like the myth guy in Hollywood in a lot of ways. So that's sort of my story of why I'm here tonight.
Thank you. Thanks.
By the way, how many people here are from the Myth program? Woo! So currently? All right, awesome. Liking it so far? Third year. Oh, almost out. Then the fun begins.
Yeah. You want to share a little bit about where you're at in your current process as a student here?
Well, I am currently the PhD ABD. I did not finish my dissertation first time around because I have a good excuse. Because the program works so well that I got hired on S.H.I.E.L.D. as an executive producer, which is, it's producing and writing, and so many wonderful things came out of it that I didn't quite get to finish. But the plan is I'm on hold for a while, is to come back and then restart that and finish it up eventually.
You have an approved concept paper.
It was.
You want to say anything about that? I'm not sure what's happening. The looks you're giving over in Lance's direction right now.
It's about tricksters.
Fitting.
It's more specifically, it's about flatulating tricksters.
Like zebras.
Yeah. But that's sort of, because to me, the fun of academia, and this is where I champion Joseph Campbell, because academia came after him, and because he was successful and stuff. So I have this sort of thumbing my nose at academia a little bit. Not the Pacifica academia, but the hardcore nuts out there. So I wanted to do something sort of irreverent, but that wasn't ultimately, because that's the topic, but it's really about the shadow and how the trickster teaches us to integrate the shadow into our persona. And then so flatulence, all these things, this is going to get a little academic here, but all these things that come from the margins of the body that are considered taboo, it's because it's our base animal instincts, which ties into the shadow. So it's really about something more than just that, but I just found that topic fascinating, and it led to this dissertation about the shadow.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. There might be some questions in the audience about that a little bit later.
Oh, I'm sure everybody wants to know about flatulating tricksters. We wake up every morning asking ourselves.
Or you wake up every morning and you find yourself in that role sometimes.
Pretty much every morning.
Let's go back to the Marvel Universe piece and what you mentioned about sort of a modern day mythology, comic books in the modern mythology. What is it about the Marvel Universe that captivates you, and specifically about superhero stories?
The main thing, I think as a kid reading Marvel comic books and superhero stories in general, there is a wish fulfillment aspect to it. But looking back sort of from a Jungian perspective, is what is a superhero if not a person finding a power within themselves for the betterment of humankind? And with every superhero, with every Superman, there's a Lex Luthor. So they're constantly facing their shadow. Batman has the Joker, which again gets into my discussion with the shadow. And I think it just, as it has many, not just me, there are many people in the film business and elsewhere in the world that just comic books were a part of their life growing up. Now it might be the Harry Potter books. But again, wish fulfillment and just knowing that there is a light inside you, a power inside you that you may not know what it is. And then once you're aware of that, it changes your life. And then it's how to use this power in a meaningful, constructive way. And I think that seems to be the initial. Looking back, that was it. When I was a kid, it's like, I want to fly, and he's got a Spider-Man suit, But it's all there. You don't realize it, but it's there when you're reading it as a child.
Who did you identify most with? Which characters?
I had Superman and Batman, light and shadow, early on. Superman, because I don't know, I felt, even though I had wonderful parents, I felt a little different in my small town. I felt like the outsider, like I was from another planet. And so I could relate to Superman, this outsider from another planet. Batman, just because he had this dark shadow quality, who's just a guy who was just going to take matters into his own hands. And I had sort of that kind of attitude as a kid as well. So I think the two of them were my light and my shadow combined.
Interesting, because one is Superman is the example of the sort of the archetypal superhero with the superpowers, but then you have someone like Batman, who's essentially, I mean, he's a human,
Right.
A superpowered human.
Right.
So it's interesting how integrating both the sort of the alien and the human in one. Yeah.
Right, and the story, I mean, the story of Superman is the story of Moses. I mean, it's a story of a lot of religious figures. There's a friend of mine, David Uslan, who is executive producer on all the Batman movies. He started out as an academic. He was teaching at Indiana University, and he loved comic books. So he proposed, at the time, this was like early 80s, to teach in the English department comic books as literature. And of course, he was laughed at. He presented this before whoever it is who has to approve classes. He pitched him this. He's like, let me tell you a story. It's about a kid who's born. His real parents put him in a basket, spaceship, send him somewhere else where he arrives at this new world and becomes a savior of mankind. And they realized that was the story of Moses, and it was the story of Superman. Like, okay, you can teach your class. But he had to make sure that the class was successful. So he himself, and this is in his autobiography, he would call, using a fake voice, call the university and be like, what is this that my kids are going to be learning about comic books at an academic institution? And it became this big controversy in the press. I remember reading about it in my hometown, which was 200 miles from Indiana. And so everybody in the comic world, Stan Lee, the creator of Marvel Comics, all these great people rallied around this guy. And they're like, and he got to meet all these people. He met with DC, and they're like, what can we give you? What do you want? We want to give you one of our properties. And this was, again, early 80s. He's like, I would like the rights to Batman. And they're like, we like you too much. It's worthless, because it was at the time. Take anything else. He's like, no, I want Batman. And they're like, there's no value in Batman. We like you, kid. So he was stubborn. So finally, for $25,000, he got the rights to Batman forever in the movie licensing world. So every time there's a Batman movie, he gets an executive producer credit, gets a big fee. So all because he loved comics and knew that comics and mythology are kindred spirits, and sold that to his university.
So what do you make of that? I mean, what do you like? I mean, the Batman series from, when was it, the 60s, the original one?
Yeah.
Like, it was wildly popular, right? And then we have the Batman movies in the 90s, the early Michael Keaton one, right?
Right, which was the first one Michael Uslan did, yeah.
But then within the last decade, there's been an unparalleled explosion of this material in Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
What do you sort of attribute that to, whether it's like from a cultural perspective or a sociological perspective? Like, what do you connect that to? Or even like a sort of a religious impulse or a mythological perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, superheroes are modern mythology. They are modern gods. Superman is Zeus, Wonder Woman Athena, Aquaman Poseidon. I mean, Flash is Mercury, Hermes. They are gods that we go to, and we read about them and we see them on the screen. And again, there's that sort of element on an unconscious level. You're recognizing that you're seeing the gods play out and the messiness of the world with the good guys and the bad guys and the interconnectedness. But there's also, again, I think it all gets back to something that connects on a Jungian level, that there is that hero within me, there is that light within me, there's that power I have, which is what we're all on this planet to do, basically. I mean, that's what Campbell, influenced by Jung, would say that, and I go in a deep dive with this, and we'll talk with Luke about this, sort of narratology. Why are we telling the same story over and over again in every mythology, in every culture? Why is that? Because it's the story of the hero's journey. You have to go out on this thing to find the thing, which is the light in yourself, which you bring back, and then you help the world. And it's why we're on this planet, and it's why we connect to all this stuff. And it was the Greek mythology, those stories they connected to. Now we connect through pop culture things, through Marvel comics, through Harry Potter, through many, many other sort of forms. But it's the same story, the same journey, because we're on the same freaking journey. And these help us along the way.
So it's a same or similar story, but with different medium.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, as we move from an oral culture to a written culture that
Right.
becomes textualized and sacralized and institutionalized in churches, then the churches sort of crumble and we get into this period of mourning. And what comes out of that mourning of our collective institutions but the rebirth of these
Right.
stories through.
And Star Wars has its own religion now. There are real live institutions that teach you the values of being a Jedi. It has formed a church. Harry Potter is a church to many people, so it has replaced religion for many people.
There are undergraduate students at University of California, Berkeley, probably this afternoon that were playing Quidditch out on their lawn. I mean, I used to
As
watch
they should
them.
be.
Yeah, like
I mean, we were just at the Hollywood Bowl to see John Williams conducting all his great scores, and he plays this Star Wars theme, and every person in the Hollywood Bowl is holding up a lightsaber. I mean, it's our religion. And you feel this connection with people, and this power you feel just holding a freaking toy lightsaber. I feel so powerful and strong, like I'm going to change the world, and then the battery went out. But such is life.
yeah. And I'm thinking of the theologian Ludwig Feuerbach, whose theory was that we essentially project our own potentials, our own superpowers onto a god or onto the gods, and then our lifetime is about sort of taking those back and retracting those and recognizing.
Yeah, and that's the goal. You project them there, and then you figure out a way to get them projected back, and then reclaim them as your own.
Which Jung would call the individuation
Yep.
process. Yeah. So what are you working on right now? Like, what's most exciting for you?
A couple of things. Shield season 6, which is my love and joy. We're producing that. And then doing another fun thing, which one of my guests today, I'm producing and promoting my first concert for Tatiana de Maria over here. And that story is kind of a mythic story too, how we end up meeting and trying this new crazy thing. It's a bit of a hero's journey as well, and a new journey for me. And so new things to face, new monsters, new fears.
And I'm not sure if this factoid is correct on IMDb about your own background as a musician.
Yeah, but not a very good one. Just, yes, no, I used to want to be a rock star, want to be a musician, but I just did not quite have the talent in that realm that I have in the writing realm. So I always joke that no matter how successful I am as a producer and writer, I will see myself as a failed rock star. And thanks to Tatiana, she's allowed me to live this life of being rock star adjacent, which is good enough. I'll take it. Fine. As close as I get. Yeah.
Well, that certainly has a mythos of itself. I'm thinking of somebody like a Grant Morrison. Right? It seems like the punk rock or the rock and roll ethos is like in the background.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of that in the comic book world.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about imagination and creativity. As we were sort of just talking around, we live in this sort of de-enchanted, demythologized, flatland sort of culture where our approaches to especially science, but even now the humanities are becoming very literalized. The trend in academia is around historical, critical methods. Everything is about context and culture, and we've sort of lost a more imaginal approach to even poetry. That was one of my hardest things as an undergraduate when I was studying as an English second major. Taking something like a poem and essentially reducing it to its pieces, right? And that's sort of that deconstructive approach to literary theory. There's, across the board, it seems like there's a scientificization of even something that might be more of an imaginal quality. So I'm wondering how comic books, films, like how it speaks to a re-enchantment of everyday life.
Yeah, it's a struggle. Everything becomes corporatized, and they suck the soul out of everything. the movie business now, especially, it's very hard because a lot of the imagination in the Marvel movies, it's borrowed imagination. They're following storylines created back in the 60s in this great creative spurt of creativity where Stan Lee and various other folks at the same time created Spider-Man and all of the things we're watching now in this one crazy moment, Fantastic Four, Incredible Hulk. And so we're sort of, and the movie business now is sort of riding on the coattails of other people's imaginations. Yet there are still imaginative filmmakers and new ideas coming, but it seems to be harder, and there seems to be in music, books, Broadway theater, a lack of imagination in that people are relying on things that were already created as opposed to this new age of great ideas coming out. Like when Coppola and Spielberg and Scorsese got together and started making movies, movements in music, the formation of the punk rock era of music. It's like, I wonder if we're ever gonna see one of those eras again because attention fans are short. And again, we're used to riding on the imaginations of those who came before us and not moving the ball forward. I worry about that. I mean, you see talented people who are fighting against that, but I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, what do you think creates something like that? I mean, I'm thinking of even like what they call the British invasion with Grant Morrison and Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman in the 80s. And I mean, like what creates that sort of a synergy that evolves culture?
Maybe it's just, the cycle of life, the ups, the downs, and we're about to have an upswing, maybe, I hope.
Well, I mean, you were talking earlier about storyteller. I mean, do you see yourself as a storyteller? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's my primary job, I think, is telling stories. Telling stories for two reasons. To learn about myself, themes I want to explore. And I do it. I still write feature films on the side where it's bigger, but even within the context of S.H.I.E.L.D., there are sort of themes that I can try to incorporate into there, ideas I want to explore on an episode-wide basis or a seasonal arc to entertain and instruct. Getting back to Aristotle, but in instructing myself, maybe I instruct others. So it's completely selfish. I write for myself to learn things, and then again, it's the boon that you go after, and the hero's journey. Bring back this power for yourself, and then it spreads to others.
Do you think you write from that place then of what you're referring to before as shadow? I mean, do you think that that's where a lot of your creative impulse comes from?
Yeah. I mean, there's a big shadow component in everything I write. It's just my theme. That's the thing I like to explore. Mm-hmm. Confrontation with the shadow side of yourself, whether it's within yourself as a character or a character facing another character who's symbolically their shadow. Mm-hmm. I will forever be exploring that personally and professionally.
To go back to the role of the imagination, this connects with being the storyteller. I mean, do you see the film or some projects that you're working on as having this sort of deeper impulse then to wake people up, maybe to the magical or to the non-ordinary? I mean, I'm thinking of like the Percy Jackson work. I mean, some of the more highly imaginative, fantasy-oriented things.
Yeah, Percy Jackson was fun because it's a family movie based on a series of books. Following in the wake of the Harry Potter, everybody's looking for the new Harry Potter, and this was basically like Harry Potter with Greek gods. What I liked about it, it became sort of a gateway drug for young people who gravitate around the books and the films to explore mythology. And then like, oh, there's Greek mythology. Oh, there's Egyptian mythology? Let me look at that. So that was kind of fun for me because I grew up on these Ray Harryhausen Greek god movies, Clash of the Titans, Jason and the Argonauts. Like that's where I first encountered mythology. And I think these books and I think the films helped, brought a whole new generation, became aware of mythology. And people, the film was successful in theaters, but hugely successful on DVD because schools were buying them to show to students to teach them mythology or to get them interested in mythology.
That's the instruction.
And then they take the deeper dive after seeing the movie.
That's true. And then I wanted to ask you about when working with, what was it like working with ScoobyDoo? I mean, that's a classic. Like, what do how do you, is that a daunting task? I mean, like, how do you take something like that?
Was it a daunting task? Well, I mean, this was early in my career, and I grew up on ScoobyDoo cartoons. I loved them. And I had a manager at the time, and he said, if you could do any dream project, what would you do? And again, this was me. This is just like my 9-year-old self dreaming of things I wanted to see, which is still a big part of my life. What does I want to see? I said, I'd like to do a live-action Scooby-Doo movie. But at the time, the technology, we didn't have CGI dinosaurs. It was pre-Jurassic Park. And then this Flintstone movie came out where they made a CGI dino, and they're like, hey, we think we can do the dog now, CG. But even that movie, it sort of got, when you write a movie, it goes through rewrites and directors and things get taken out of it. But the original script was about, because Scooby-Doo, they're always facing ghosts, right? What are ghosts? They're your shadow. So it was even sort of a Jungian Scooby-Doo in a way in its early drafts, disguised, but it was, the overarching theme was facing your fears. Every character had to sort of face their fear and then integrate it. So it was, before I even knew it, it was quite Jungian on the shadow level, and I didn't even know I was doing that at the time.
It's interesting. You mentioned the child and the role of your childhood self, sort of as a present-day adult. Like, what do you see the role of the child in the creative process?
My master, basically. I'm constantly having conversations with my 9-year-old self. And I try, I mean, you should see my home office. It looks like walking into my 9-year-old brain. Things, toys and things hanging around. But that's where my inspiration comes from, because I think that's when I was most creative and in awe of the world. So I try to stay very in touch with the inner child. Especially when I'm doing things like, in the Marvel comic book world. I mean, my office, I got a giant Hulk standing right behind my desk and crazy stuff like that. There are other things that I'm doing that are a little darker and deeper and more adult, if you will. So I don't know how my inner child's going to play in that. I'm just going to have to lock him up and say, go to bed, it's your bedtime. It's grown-up time now.
Do you want to speak to what some of those projects are? Or?
They're future things.
Okay. Still in the
vault.
vault.
If I talk about them, things will happen.
Of course. Any advice could we have, a few Myth students here, other Pacifica students here? Do you have any depth? Any advice for current students, or this is 2 questions, or anyone attempting to break into the field of being a storyteller?
Yeah, I mean, it's all here. That's the beauty of Pacifica. You have everything you need to be a great writer and storyteller, because you got the stories. I mean, in mythology, we're reading the myths. We're reading people talking about the myths. So you have the great stories. You got the Jung, which, I'm a big Jungian, which I think a lot of storytelling comes from, at least for me, comes from that camp. I think he was, although he didn't talk a lot about storytelling and writing, it was all there, which then, Jung begot Campbell, who begot, things like the Chris Vogel book. So I think at Pacifica, everything you need to be a writer is right there. It's such a treasure chest of tools that I still pull upon. So I'm forever grateful I decided to come here. It's made me a different writer. It's given me a career I didn't know I would have. And it gave me some self-awareness, which I went kicking and screaming about that part, but I ended up becoming a little more self-aware, and whatever.
Maybe we could take a few questions now for Craig before the whole panel comes up. Just any sort of burning questions from anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, even though I wouldn't call it the hero's journey. I would call it the heroine's journey too. Just replace the word. I mean, I think it's a universal journey. We get into the anima of it all, but I don't distinguish. I mean, I don't think the hero's journey is completely masculine. I think it's both. I mean, the stories that were told in days gone by all had male heroes, but look at for example, Wonder Woman, the new DC movie. I'll always reference movies. that's a hero's journey story, but it's also a feminine empowerment story.
Okay. I invite you just to check out Kim Hudson's The Virgin's Promise.
Uh-huh.
It takes 4 steps beyond Campbell's hero's journey into the feminine side,
Oh,
which
cool.
is the hero goes to bring back the boon for society, and the feminine story, she goes beyond bringing back the boon to becoming holy herself in the world, and it's such a Jungian core to
Cool,
it.
great.
So-
What's the name of the book again?
it's a small read, but Brian Weiss Productions backed her. It's Kim
Yeah.
Hudson's The Virgin's Promise.
The Virgin's Promise.
I do take exception, however, she contrasts the virgin and the whore with the hero and the coward. So I'm not in favor of that. But it's a good,
Yeah, it
it's
seems
got a
odd.
good premise.
Okay, I'll check it out. Thank you.
But it brings up an interesting question. I mean, the rise of the feminine, or specifically women's voices in culture today, and what's really been a very, very dark, prolonged death of sort of a particularly white male status. And how is that coming out in films today? I mean, that's shifting the industry. I mean, comic
Yeah,
books
I
were
mean-
always for adolescent boys in a certain sense, right?
They were, but you go to Comic-Con, Comic-Con, it's the big comic book convention every year in San Diego, and it used to be like all guys, right? Now it's 50-50 at least, if not skewing more towards women, because I think that's happened. I think the cultural shift in general, but people are finding things and embracing them. Every sex, every culture. I mean, especially we're getting more multicultural heroes, especially in the Marvel universe. There's going to be a new Muslim superhero, or there is already, and they're going to do a feature of that. I just think it's good all around. It's basically the boys' club has been is just a piece of it now. It's great for everything.
Well, and the other piece too is that I think superhero comics are getting the spotlight in Hollywood, but I'm thinking of all of the more recent graphic novels, especially somebody like Brian K. Vaughan and Saga and some of these other.
Are you a secret nerd?
I was invited up here for a reason.
Wait, okay, this isn't research you did, because you're throwing out some cool names here, dude.
But comic books are not for kids anymore.
I know, and you know. You guys know now.
Yeah, I mean, and I bring up Brian K. Vaughan because I'm thinking of the Comic-Con thing. I mean, I'm sure the Saga characters are probably more, get more of the fanboy, fangirl dress-up thing more than
Right.
anything else,
Yeah,
the cosplay thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a shift, and that's something that I don't know if many people get if they're not hanging out like on a Saturday night at the comic book store. Like, I might be, or I might have been there this afternoon, but no one will know.
Yeah, perhaps.
Because that's my secret identity.
Secret handshake.
But there's a shift, right? And it's not necessarily
Absolutely.
happening in Hollywood.
I mean, it's a seismic shift, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, comic books today are existentially palpable. I mean, they're about real life, sort of deeper questions of meaning and relationships and race and gender
Yeah.
in a way that maybe only Chris Claremont was doing with the X-Men back in the 70s
Right.
and 80s.
Right, and Marvel was always, they were always on the cutting edge of progressive issues in their comic books.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the Black Panther comic book. They dealt with racism, they dealt with bullying, they dealt with all these things at the time
Yeah.
when few people were talking about it, but comic books did.
Reagan era politics and the drug war. And,
Yeah.
So time is flying and you have more friends.
We have lots of
So
friends.
why don't we invite some friends up here, and we're going to do a little bit of a... Oh, okay, another question, sure.
Yeah, I had a question. You mentioned that most of the material is based on, first of all, mythology and from characters invented in the 60s. So how does that play into things like Star Wars and Harry Potter? And are you making inroads in your own life to try and create new characters and new stories?
Yeah, always. I mean, I think Harry Potter and Star Wars, they're both sort of, they clearly have antecedents and borrowed from, like Star Wars borrows from Flash Gordon and things like that, but as we all do, every artist you borrow from other things, but to make it something unique. And I think Star Wars and Harry Potter are both sort of new modern mythologies, using the term loosely. But yeah, I think they're completely inventive and unique. Obviously, they have influences. And yeah, I'm always trying. I mean, I don't sit down like, I'm going to write my Star Wars, my thing that resonates forever and ever, and go crazy. I mean, I know people that try to do that, and you go crazy. I just try to write what I want to write what appeals to me, and what happens, happens. I hope somebody likes it.
Do you want to join us? And I'm going to do some additional intro here of some friends. So we're going to get some chairs up here. So, Craig's friends.
Craig's friends.
Real
life friends.
Real life friends. So we have 3 additional guests joining us up here. The first is Luke Ryan. Luke is the founder and CEO of Chaotic Good, a company that specializes in advanced audience analytics, content strategy, story design, and world building. His team works with the world's largest film, television, and game studios, as well as Fortune 500 companies, to design and produce content across all media platforms. Prior to forming Chaotic Good, Luke served as a senior studio executive at MGM, MTV Films, and New Line Cinema. Tatiana de Maria is a British musician, songwriter, singer, and record producer. She was the founder and lead vocalist, guitarist of the London-based rock band Tat, and by age 17, she had written the band's debut album, Soho Lights, which led to 2 UK charting singles. She's currently working on her first solo album, a record that moves across the spectrum, pairing ruthless honesty with explosive choruses and deep, colorful production. The result is a sound she describes as a blend of synthetic and organic sound, a perfect meeting point between the spirit of the more rock-driven songs of Tat and the unique genre-bending style she's developed over the years. And friend number 3, Evans Lansing Smith, is the chair and core faculty of the Mythological Studies program here at Pacifica, home of the Joseph Campbell Archives and the only advanced degree in mythology program in the world. Dr. Smith traveled with Joseph Campbell on tours of northern France, Egypt, and Kenya, with a focus on the Arthurian romances and mythologies of the ancient world. Lance is also a published poet and the author of 8 books and many articles on comparative literature and mythology. So please welcome our 3 additional guests for this evening.
Yeah.
You're no stranger to the handheld mic.
Yeah.
So I was thinking maybe we could just go down and say a few words, just introducing yourself. And I think the general theme of the conversation this evening is around creativity, the imagination, and it sounds like the theme of culture, emerging cultures, and what's sort of happening in our collective right now, and the role that music and the arts and film has to do with that. So I would just feel free to, this is like open mic jam, just like, yeah. Free verse.
My name is Tatiana de Maria. Hello. You read all sorts of things about me. So yes, I'm English, and it's a pleasure to be here. I met Craig very randomly in Cuba, which was great. And then we started working together recently, which has been a lot of fun. And we're putting a show on together in October, and we're dipping into all sorts of fun, creative avenues together, which is great. So it's been a lot of fun, and also exploring Craig's background and dipping into that to really just create new things together has been fantastic. And mythology's come up a fair few times, so it's been a delight to explore that from my side of things. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm from the same hometown as Craig, and we traveled similar but very different paths. Craig worked very hard at Eastern Illinois University, successfully went to USC, and then broke into the film business on his own. I was thrown out of USC, graduated barely from Eastern Illinois University, and the thing that got me out of there the quickest, and then called Craig and said, "We don't know each other, but would you please help me?" And he's a very nice man who did. But part of our relationship and working together and being mentored by Craig along the way, Pacifica actually was tangentially really influential in the things that I've been doing, because when I was visiting you one time, Morphology of the Folktale by Vladimir Prop was on your desk. I was like, what is this? And you were like, it's an entire equation for Russian folk tales. And I was like, my God, there must be entire equations for other things too. I must find them. And which then kind of got into breaking down the very specific things that underlie kind of big pieces of whether it's culture or intellectual property or even components of story, which has led me to doing the things that I'm doing now. So that's I'm excited to be here at Pacifica for the first time and visiting with all of you.
Well, I just want to say how grateful I am that Craig came up to talk with such grace and articulation about what you've been doing. And it's one of the joys of being at Pacifica is to have students who are a lot smarter than you are, a lot more creative, and who manage to pull something from what you have to offer and take it out into the world. So thanks so much, Craig. That was a beautiful conversation. And David, good Lord, you're ready for like late night TV as a, as a Dick Cavett guy interviewing people about myth, folktale, and cartoons is fantastic. Thank you both.
Thanks for being here. I'm going to just let you do whatever you want to do right now.
Okay. Well, thinking about who to invite for this, it's like two of the most creative people I know, literally, and from different backgrounds. Because Luke and I, we used to talk story forever, and we got deep into, like we were saying, like the analytics of story. And then Tatiana, when we met in Cuba, we were just random strangers talking, and I think we talked about we liked the Clash and Ramones, and said, oh, I'm a musician. You can see my stuff on YouTube. No Wi-Fi in Cuba, hard to get. So when I get home, like, oh, I should look up this Tatiana's music. We always joke about this. I'm expecting like Lulu in the coffee shop, at the corner of Starbucks. And I pull up this film, like, is this PG or what's our rating here? R?
I don't know. There are. Looks like we have some minors in the audience.
Oh, so all right. So I watch like effing rock star. It's like what? I remember like, okay, bearing the lead. Failed to mention the fact that you were a freaking rock star in your band Tat, and I listened to her album, and it's just literally became one of my favorite artists of all time. It just spoke to me on many levels, and a lot of it I think is because truth and honesty in her lyrics. And so it's been fun for me just having these conversations about, we're fascinated with each other, I think. Where do your movie ideas come from? Where do your lyric ideas come from? And I brought with me, I'm going to embarrass you or not embarrass you, but the first song I heard of her is this. She wrote this when she was 17. And this is kind of why I responded to her music and her lyrics, because I'm like, this is a song where there are at least 4 lines I would like have tattooed on my body somewhere. Like, can I read? Sure. From Road to Paradise. Again, she was 17 at the time. And it gets mythic at the end, too. No one's paved the road to paradise or guaranteed that it'd be nice. It's just a long road, hard road, dragging our little red dragon till we're 6 feet under, wondering what the F have I done? Where did all my time go? At times in life, you got to take a chance and dance on broken glass and see who lasts, which is like my favorite line. I mean, that's just the beginning of this stuff. And I'm like, when I was 17, I was writing, I'm at home, all alone, by the phone, life's a bone. And then, okay, it was last night. But anyway, this is how it started, and now I've seen your new stuff. So can you talk a little bit about, I know you've been searching for the truth of your voice, leaving sort of Tat behind, and with the solo career, can you talk a little bit about what that process has been like?
Sure. I love that you printed those out, by the way. I did not know where you were going to go with that. So I was very young when I'd started writing this album, and I was just a kid with a lot of adrenaline. And it's funny, on the subject of creativity, would be in interviews and people would say, you know, tell us about being creative. And that was always a massive question mark above my head, because I thought, I've never felt remotely creative. And I always just thought, oh, I don't know, I'm just being honest. And what happened was, you know, I'd write the music and play instruments, but to me that was, it just feels good and it feels like this. And when I hear a song, I feel a certain way, and what I create needs to feel the same. And it was very basic and very simple. And as time went on, I was very lucky and things went well with my music. And we toured the world and we did 1,000 shows on the same album. And I was about ready to throw myself off a bridge because it was a lot. And so when I came home, I'd started just in the background writing different things. I needed the energy to flow, and I was producing a completely different sound, and I was just excited and making things. And one thing led to another, and I took meetings with people because I write and produce for movies and jingles and others. And so I was in a meeting to write for other people, and the executive said, well, why don't we release this as a solo album? And I thought about it, and it was interesting because I had just very simply fallen into writing things and expressing myself. And when I was young, I went through a hard time and I found music and I thought, shit, this is the cure to everything. It feels amazing and I need to tell everybody music will just save us. Because I was a really naive kid, as much as there's truth in that. So essentially what I'm trying to get at is I then went, okay, solo record, and there's this sound and it's a new sound. And I got caught up in that. And as I was writing, I had realized that I was writing songs. I'd sit down and I'd go, this is a song, and I'm going to write a song. And I was frustrated because nothing really felt like myself. And there was creativity, and as creative as I would get, I remember having a meeting with someone who said, this song is a hit, but it doesn't sound like you. And it was the most debilitating thing to hear, because I was like, what do you mean? I wrote it. And I couldn't quite understand what that meant. So I went on this journey for a few years, and I was writing these songs, and I was getting increasingly frustrated because I was going, well, what do you mean it doesn't sound like me? I'd write these songs and go, here you go, and they'd be like, no. And then I would not write songs, not play my instrument, but I would go out and I would sit at restaurants. And about 10 seconds into any conversation with any friend, I would just be losing it with a million opinions, like, wait, no, and then this. And I'd just be such an opinionated person and very argumentative, but then I'd go home, sit down, and be like, I have nothing to say in my songs. And it took me a while to come full circle and say, hang on a second, something's gotten lost along the way. And as Graig was saying, you know, there's the commercial piece and there's the creative piece. And I hadn't realized that the blend of the music and the honesty had taken me down a creative path. And in a way, I feel like very much, the way I look at Pacifica in a way is the way I look at Picasso studying fine art and really learning the depths of a craft, learning the depth of stories, learning where things come from, give you the tools and the skills to then manipulate the rules and break them later, and draw parallels like Superman, because these stories are timeless. But they're timeless in the sense that sounds change. You know, we listen to the 80s and it's really easy for us to go, that sounds like the 80s. That sounds like the 90s. That sounds like the 2000s. But in each era, whatever they sound like, whether they look like Superman, whether it looks like a god, whether it looks like clouds and rain or spandex, the story is still there. And we have to evolve with time. So essentially, instead of getting caught up with the sound and the medium and looking at it and thinking, you know, this is Superman or this is a song that's in this realm, I started to just go back to basics and say, you argue all the time. You clearly have a lot of pent-up shit going on. So lay down a beat and go nuts. And so I started doing that. And it was really, really fun for me. Fuck what everybody else thinks. I mean, if you like the record or hated it, this one, I was like, I'm having fun. But it was great for me to really just connect. And it's interesting because I feel like I had gone through this path of mathematically, again, in a similar way, calculating songs and learning so many different aspects of the craft and still coming out with a song that hadn't touched me. And then coming full circle to why did I make music in the first place? And it was because when I was 14, I was a fucked up kid and I heard music And I felt like it saved my life. And I think a lot of us who listen to music can relate and go, in that moment, I needed it. And coming full circle, I relate a lot to, on days when I was feeling down, it's funny having met Graig. When I met Graig, he gave me some comic books. And he said, here you go, you can read some. Well, when I met you again. And I was reading them, and there's something in it which I relate to massively. And I think we all have somewhere at the root of us. Which is when I was making music, being caught up in the medium, I didn't connect. And when I just started remembering the purpose of why I got into it, which was I wanted to help, I wanted to share what I had felt, things became a lot easier. And when I started just being a human, I realized that, as Graig was saying, there's a power in all of us to some degree that we just feel and we want to express. And we don't realize that when we amplify that expression, people take it and it amplifies their expression. People can put, if people are not feeling very confident, I know that putting on a superhero movie is like, fuck yeah, let's go. So essentially, I've gone on a bit of a random tangent. What was the question?
I think you answered the question. It's just the process you were going through, the transition from 14 to 17-year-old self to now, and that lesson of striving for honesty, because I think that's what we're all doing. And whether you're writing comic books or movies or music, it's the search for honesty. And if you can be honest with yourself, it's going to resonate with others more so than just trying to write a hit or the movie of the day,
It's amazing, isn't it, how we're just working intellectually doesn't really do anyone any good, but being a human, which actually I was thinking about this when you were talking, superheroes are essentially our amplified good or our amplified idea of good. And so, I think we're humans. We, again, feel the 7 emotions. We all have so much in common. And I remember thinking, people like really weird shit out there, so someone's bound to like my songs. And I was lucky that a couple of people did. But essentially it was about being honest, and I think that's what we share with a lot of mythology. We're all human in the end of the day, so you can dress it up, dress it down any way you like, whether it's music, storytelling, films, mythology. It's the same stories across the board, and it's about connecting, I guess.
Cool. And Tatiana obviously did not get the PG-13 memo.
So did we agree it was PG-13?
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You're a punk rock girl. You're incapable.
Sorry.
Of not. That's all right. So a question for Luke, based on what Tatiana was saying. So Luke has an interesting perspective because he was a studio executive at one point, sort of reading scripts, looking for something to say, people who had a voice. He also writes scripts, and then you do this world building thing, which we'll get into that in a second. But how does this all, I guess on many levels, the inspiration, the creativity, looking for it on a page, where do you find it in your own writing? And then we're going to talk a little bit about world building.
Okay. Trying to think of better than I know it when I see it. But I think for me, I've always been fascinated inside of art in the fact that there's math that lays beneath it. Whether you're talking about paintings, whether you're talking about music, whether you're talking about writing, there are very specific equation-like pieces that kind of fit inside of all of those things. But those are the foundations upon which you build the unique things. That, like, if you look at like animal courtships, they have math to them too. It's like, how are you hitting the correct pressure points to bring about the right conditions to let people receive and feel the things that they need to feel? And I think the understanding of that, as you kind of go deeper into that, I've always looked at like art is this mystical thing, and then you push through and you're like, oh, it's really just kind of all math. And then you like get deeper into the math and you're like, oh no, it's actually really all mystical. And it kind of keeps going in all these different cycles. And as you kind of travel through those things, I feel like that's kind of as you're improving your craftsmanship. And the things I look for are really what are the things that are going to genuinely move people in one way or another. I've been responsible for making really aggressively stupid movies. I've made Hot Tub Time Machine. I've made Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. A few others that my mom's just not proud of. But at the same time, there was something also really truthful beneath each of those that resonated in different ways. And I think, for me, in terms of first looking for that, it's what's going to connect, because what I really like is to introduce something that is somehow going to get into the cultural conversation and give a different bent or velocity to it in a specific way. And then in terms of fostering that, I think about it in the way that, I don't know, it's almost like when you're working with a writer, I think I'm about to just really mix a lot of metaphors right now, but on one hand, I kind of think about horse racing, because I come from a family of degenerate gamblers who are actually good at it, but they a lot of the theories behind these fall in. But when you look at a jockey riding a great racehorse, the racehorse is actually the athlete and the animal. It is actually the athlete inside of that. And when you're working with a writer, it's how do you guide them around the track in the best way possible while still letting them be the complete essence of what they are? How are you kind of finding the things that they're trying to say? And for me, as a business person and as a creative person, I feel like my job is to work with creative people and remove any and all obstructions from them, whether that be on the business side of things or whether that be in their own creative challenges. And so looking at that, kind of trying to find the different things that almost in the way of good therapy, how are you not prescribing what somebody should be doing, but how are you tapping into the thing that got them excited in the first place, and then helping them realize that in a way that connects to as many people as possible while maintaining as much credibility in the original idea as possible, is really, I think, the goal in everything that I try to do. Does that answer?
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And then Lance.
Yes.
I know you first as my professor, so you have to deal with all of us boneheads every day. And then you also have written some wonderful academic books, which I think yours are way more fun than most of them. But then also poetry. There's a weird sort of the creative process of the poetry and the sort of rigid academic thing. What muses do you call upon for each of those, or is one more rote, one is more indulging your creative side? Is there a difference between how you approach each of these endeavors? And do you try to put poetry in the academics?
Well, yeah, in many ways, there are a couple ways I could go with this question. But my whole work comes out of a response to language, to the novelists and the poets, and a careful attention to the imagery and the story and the syntax of the sentences, what you would call the geometry or the math of the sentences. And there's such a deep resonance that comes from paying attention to those things that for me, in the process of writing about Thomas Mann or James Joyce or Hilda Doolittle, it was the deep engagement that came from the images in relationship to the language. So that the process of responding to that in an academic book, in some ways, is not so very different to the process of producing your own poetry, combining story and image in a particular form. Although, of course, from that point of view, it's much more deeply personal when you're doing that as a poet. You can disguise yourself as a critic, an academic writer, but when you're writing as a poet, there's no place to hide. It's all out there. So, but they both engage the same kind of deep creative energies that Tatiana and Luke were talking about in terms of why write a song. and where the song comes from. They're very similar for me, and I'm lucky in that regard. It's not the case for many academics.
You know, it's interesting. It feels like a lot of what we're talking about with creativity and analytics is, you know, I know this is a contested theory, but the idea about a left and a right hemisphere of the brain, and they have different operations. Right. And there's a theory that comic books actually are one of the very rare and few things in life that actually combine and integrate both right and left hemispheres of the brain, because you're doing both analytic work of having to read and interpret grammar and syntax, but then it also engages the right hemisphere because you're dealing with image and symbol. So you have both of these things happening simultaneously, which creates a very unique sort of cross-wiring between both hemispheres of the brain, which can spark creativity and sort of novel experiences through the reading in itself of a comic book or a graphic novel. So I think it's interesting as part of the creative process here of what we're sort of getting into is almost like a neuroscience or a neuropsychology of creativity.
Interesting. Another question for you, Tatiana, because you were telling me about the moment it clicked for you with the new material. It was the AWS song. And it was the first time like you felt you were just completely honest, vulnerable in a way. What was that like? Did you resist it? How did you resist it? Were you afraid of it, or what was the moment where you just went for it? Because talking to you, I think that's the turning point that changed everything, right? Or I might be wrong, for this new process.
Yeah, there's a song that Graig is referencing, and I have these piles of lyrics, and I guess going through this process of having these songs and feeling a bit frustrated, I had this thing in my head which was a and I would go around thinking I'd like to make that somewhere somehow, but you know, it was very convoluted thinking for me at the time because I was trying to process thoughts and put them into songs. It was all a big mess. So essentially, I resisted the entire process every single step of the way. So from putting the over a beat, and then, you know, judging everything. Is this sucks, who needs that? And then the beat, and who needs the and the beat, they both suck. And then essentially I just kept going down this path. And I tore books up and I just threw things around. And eventually I allowed myself to be honest. And something I find interesting is in all creative industries, I've found that a lot of go-tos are throw things at the wall and see what sticks, as we know. And in music, I've been in meetings where people will say, talking about some other artists, this artist writes hits, but they don't know who they are. So we're going to put them in rooms with 30 writers over the course of the next month, and we're going to see what comes out. And I'm thinking, you need to put that person in a forest by themselves, or you need to put them in an improv class, or you need to get them to connect. And so essentially, I was going through that transition for myself, and I started writing lyrics over this song. And I had so many words, and in what I was writing, I was trying to put all of myself into every song, which was just an overwhelming and ridiculous task. So as I'm going through the song, in fact, right before the song we're talking about, AWS, can I go PG, not PG? How are we doing?
Yeah, whatever.
Well,
You're the punk
throwing the
rock star.
baby out with the bathwater already. So I was trying to write a song, and I thought, you know what? I'm tired of thinking about this. I'm going to write a song, and I'm going to make it deliberately crap. I'm going to just make a really bad song, and let's run with this. So I picked up my guitar, and there was someone I wanted to bang at the time. We're all human, taking it down to basics. The first words out of my mouth were, I want to fuck you, over some chords. And I was like, well, there we go. That's crap, but it's honest, and it's whatever. And I just played it, and I kept going. And then when I was done, I was like, great, that felt good. I've expressed myself, and it was honest, and I needed to get that out. And then I went to buy something at the store, and I kept singing it. And I came back, and I kept singing it. This track's actually coming out in a week, by the way. It's just occurred to me. So anyway, I was like, you know what? It felt good. And I got to a part of the song where I wrote a lyric, and it felt, like I was admitting something I didn't really want to admit. And I looked back and I played it to someone and they said, oh, that makes me really uncomfortable. And I was like, you know what, good. Because it makes me uncomfortable to say it. And in fact, I want you to be uncomfortable. I'm tired of shit being so, again, PG, or it is a song and this is the structure and you shall feel this because I haven't hit these notes. There's a mathematical equation to it. But I wanted people to feel. And so I wanted to feel. So I started writing another song, and then I get to the middle eight, and this song, not out yet, but it's coming out. And I admitted something that I didn't really want to admit. And I looked back at it, and how, I sort of got through that process was I produce and record things at home. And I looked at it, and I kept looking at it, and I allowed myself to be honest without judgment because I knew no one would hear it. And I looked at this song, and I looked at what I had said. I was an asshole. Someone had passed away, and I was a bit of a dickhead in that moment. And so I put it in a song. And I felt completely naked doing it, which was exhilarating because I realized I needed to process these emotions. And I sat with it for a while, and I remember playing this song to some people close to me, thinking, you're not going to like this. The style is different, and just you're not going to like it. And they flipped out. And they were like, this is the best thing you've ever written, as is generally the case with all the stuff we write. It's the things that fall out of us that we think no one will like tends to be the best stuff. And it's because there's a saying I very much like by one of my teachers from a long time ago, which said the art you're meant to make is the secret you're trying to keep. And that resonated with me, and I think it's very true for all of us. And so it was sort of practice, taking time, allowing myself to feel uncomfortable, wanting to feel uncomfortable, and realizing that we're in such an age of escapism, and we have our phones, and feeling is such a problem for us. I think about people who rode across countries on horseback and just, got flus and died, or just the pioneers, the things they went through. And as soon as we feel something, we pick up our phone and we're like, Instagram. And that goes on for a while. So essentially, it was confronting emotion. It was tricky at the beginning, but it's something that I've really found joy in, and I've really found pleasure in. And I found that everything, again, that you talk about, the only way I resonate with it is if I'm in my truth. The only way I resonate with why mythology is something that's so important to us, why the storytelling is so important to us, is because we share the same stories. And when we try and intellectualize them, when we try and second guess them, when we try to pretend to be someone we're not, we're creating these false identities that are not rooted in the human experience. And so that's when people relate less. So I guess that was sort of my journey in being a bit more honest.
And then the counterpart to that, Luke, you're very into analytics, studying trends and things like that. And you've always been fascinated with sort of the mathematical equations of a story. Is there a mathematical equation for a hit film? The mathematical equation for just story in general. And then now your new venture doing this world building, which is how do you take an idea and turn it, like what's the movie, what's the TV series, what's the book, how it all comes out of this, like there might be a line in the movie that becomes the backstory for a book series, and the video games and everything, which is very much like a big equation in and of itself. Have you, Luke Ryan, found majesty and heart and soul in analytics? Because I think you have, and
I think we've found a pathway to it. I employ a team of people who are way smarter than me, and that helps. But I think one of the biggest things was in creating entertainment and having it be honest and having it live in a place where it could connect with people is first understand what it is and why we're making it. And one of the things that drove me nuts and got me in a lot of trouble as a feature film executive was I didn't accept the things that we measure. And if you're unaware, movies think of everybody sitting here in one of four categories. Either you're a man or a woman, and either you're over or under 25. And women over 25, we all know all like the exact same things. So you're going to, which is, it's untrue and it's silly and it makes me angry. And in looking at, for instance, my mom, who is a 72-year-old person living in a small town in rural Illinois who should never walk into the fantasy or sci-fi book section of any Barnes & Noble if you can find one, and has created this interesting relationship with Game of Thrones, and watching the ways in which, especially right now in a content landscape where there's so much stuff, I think we used to consume horizontally, what is everything that's out there. I was talking to a friend the other night who said he went to dinner with 2 other couples, and everybody was talking about, what are you watching right now? And all 6 of them, including he and his wife, were watching different shows, and he said it was fascinating to hear about what everybody else was watching. And then all 6 people got up from the table and had no intention of watching what anybody else was watching, no matter how fascinating that was. So I think people pick the things that they like, and then they look for depth inside of it. How do you actually create ongoing depth? And I have a wonderful team who do research and insights, who are able to go inside. They come from kind of the tree of a professor named Henry Jenkins, who began at MIT and then is now at USC Annenberg, and was really at the forefront of making fandom a real academic pursuit. And looking at that, and what we're able to measure is behavior. That how does somebody respond in relation to somebody? Because if you can see what somebody does, it takes away gender, it takes away location, it takes away all these other things that we used to judge the way we should make art about. And we can say, if I do this, if I make this happen, I can see all these people react this way, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively, and sometimes negatively is good. My head of research, her thesis at MIT was on how negative sentiment inside of the Twilight franchise is actually the most critical economic driver of the entire franchise. That fans of Twilight love to love it, and they'll just lay there and love it. But then when the haters hate, the fans spend money, and that's what makes them spend money. So you counterintuitively have to inject negative sentiment into this thing in order to achieve the highest economical arrival of it. Sorry, I don't get out much. But and so beginning to understand what people actually genuinely respond to in a way where you're not guessing and you're not generalizing, you're actually able to see what they do inside of it, and then going to build things with depth on top of that. And so to me, the key to world building inside of something is understanding kind of what at a molecular level makes people attached to it, because everybody participates in a different way. You feel about Game of Thrones in a completely different way than I probably do, as you may, and some people may not at all. And that may be different in the way we feel about House of Cards. We kind of connect to these things in different ways, and we behave in different ways in relation to them, but there are very clear cohorts inside of that you can understand how they operate and how they share information with one another. And then you begin to design the things that you think are going to be the closest to giving them positive experiences that are affirmational inside of that larger piece of content, or are negative in a sense that actually that frustration breeds something that it makes it even more actually increases the affection that they have. So before without getting too technical into the synchronization and between a book or a film, and there's an art to that as well, especially in not repeating yourself in all of those places. It really is about, I think, knowing your audience, but in a different way that has moved past really these broad generalizations that haven't served us well for decades.
You are the new Vladimir Prop, without doubt. Have you read that in Mythology yet? You'll get there. That is simple. You're writing down a bunch of questions?
These are things for me to take home and contemplate. These are my personal notes at this point. This is.
Oh, I see. All alone by the phone. Oh.
There you go.
Just because you made me think something, if I may, sorry to jump in, which was, I think a big differentiator for me was there's doing things and then there's ways of being. And I think, we can think in statistic ways, and statistics really do show us behaviors when you really boil it down and you're asking the correct questions. But there's sort of an element of, in all creative fields, people like this and I can do this. I can make this type of song, or I can make this type of movie. And then if you take it a step beneath that, there are core values and why people like things. And I think people like things more based on their core values, which is why if you'll argue with someone politically, you'll never win or get to the end of the argument, because they're not arguing based on facts. We argue based on values. And so I think when it comes to, again, mythology, superheroes, what you're creating, it becomes that difference between knowing what people like, therefore creating it, which is a doing action, versus ways of being, which is, again, when you watch a superhero movie or you're touched by something, I think you're also touched at the core value level of the way someone is being. Are they being courageous? Are they being responsible? Are they being creative? Are they being the things you want to be, which increases that human connection? And so in a way, looking at what people want to consume, but also looking at, instead of what the demographics like, also looking at the values of the demographics and how we play into that was just something that was a turning point for me. So appreciated hearing you say that. So, sorry.
Cool. Yeah. We're all looking for the Holy Grail. That's right. Which brings me to Lance, because you do a lot of work with Arthurian legends and romances and the Grail. From a movie perspective, at least twice a year, they're doing a new King Arthur movie. It's just consistently. In your studies, this clearly is a tale that resonates and connects over time. Have you done an analytical, like Luke has, ever considered why this resonates or why it resonates with you over the years? Because it's one of the sort of the standard stories in movies and television, and it just over and over and over again, we can't seem to get enough of it.
Yeah. Well, the most of the films I've seen aren't very good, and one of the reasons is that they're not rooted in the foundation of the texts from the Middle Ages, which are so absolutely marvelous in every possible way. Great Tian of Troy and Wolfgang von Eschenbach, and their texts are so rich and offer so much more than what John Borman did with Mallory in Excalibur, which was quite wonderful, actually. But there's so much more that can be done if those screenwriters and cinematographers and producers would really, really try to approximate what's there in the text. And it comes down to the most spectacular mythological settings and scenes and costumes and clothing and the great, great deep symbols of the world of myth. So that if they would really try to stick to that in a more disciplined way, I think it would produce really quite marvelous films that are still out there to be made. And I can't really explain why they go so deep, apart from this reservoir of myth and folktale that they draw from. So I'd love to see.
And do you think there's a core, because you're saying it's just a story well told is why it has endured, but I think there's something that resonates that's beyond the story that it's inspired Eliot's The Wasteland. What is that magic in there, that thing that we all seem to respond to? Is a longing for the past, a longing for an Avalon, the Grail that can change us?
Well, I'm really not so much interested in the quest for the Grail as a symbol. I think it's been overdone. When people say this, that, and the other thing is the Holy Grail, I get bored real fast.
The modern cliche.
So what the part of the stories that I really like the most are the various episodes and encounters that evoke really, really profound, deep archetypal energies that in some way are related to the quest overall, but on an individual basis, when you put them all together, there's just, it opens up in such a deep way. And I back to my original point, it's a matter of the images and the story, the mythic and the archetypal resonance that the stories have. And the same is true of the great folk ballad traditions, Tam Lin and Thomas the Rhymer, all the things that, Pentangle was doing in my day, with the folk ballads and Stevie Winwood with John Barleycorn. The stories are so marvelous, and the images in the stories are so terrific that they're beyond any explanation of, why we like them. They just engage us, in really, really deep ways. So to go back to the beginning of your question, I'm not really analytical from that point of view.
Okay.
You want to open it up to some audience?
Sure. Questions from the audience? Yeah?
I'm Pamela. I just wanted to ask Tatiana if she has a female superhero. I'm just thinking, I don't know if Bionic Woman counts, but there's Wonder Woman, and I couldn't think if there was somebody that inspired you besides the music when you were younger. And then also my second part, I was just curious. It sounds like you had some kind of trauma that you had to overcome that you led you to the music. And if you have resolved that, and since it seems to me like you have every gift that God could give a woman, your beauty, your talent, you're intelligent, you're articulate, humble. So I'm thinking to myself, do you have self-esteem from the trauma that you went through? And if so, how did you get it back? And if not, what is the struggle about? Is that still there for you? Because I just see someone so amazing, and I'm like, do you really feel that amazing inside? How amazing you look from the outside. Thanks.
I think. Firstly, thank you very much for your kind words. They're far too kind. And I would say a blanket statement that I think none of us really feel as good as we may come off. And I think that's sort of the art of the social interaction, is curating yourself so perfectly that people can at least, garner some clear image of what you're projecting, what you want to project. I think to start at the beginning of your questions, I actually grew up. It's funny because I've never really looked up to many women, and it's not because there wasn't reason to look up to women. I grew up being a tomboy, and my idols musically were The Clash, Tupac, Michael Jackson. And I think what I found growing up was that I got really frustrated when I was buying trainers, sneakers when I was a kid, because I was with my dad, and he took me shopping, and he's taking his little girl shopping, and I'm 3 years old, and there were these shoes on the wall. And in the late 80s, we had pumps, right? So the guys could wear these pumps, and I was like, yeah, graffiti pumps. And my dad was like, my little girl, here are your shoes. And they were like pink and gray, crappy Reeboks. And I was like, oh. And I'm a kid that's lucky enough to get Reeboks. I mean, cool. But I just remember growing up, and I was always frustrated because all the cool art and graffiti and imagery was always on men's T-shirts. And women's T-shirts was always just, fitted, pink, hello, darling. So I grew up not really relating to society's image of a woman. And I never really rebelled, I just wasn't interested. So I kind of was like, I didn't like it that women in music, for the most part, didn't really play their instruments, or they were always dressed up, or it was always a tutu, and I just couldn't relate. What I related to was the raw power in Tupac's lyrics, in his strength, in his, I'm gonna say this because I feel it, no matter what's gonna happen to me. The Clash's energy and adrenaline, and I think I resonated with that adrenaline, male or female. I just found it more in males. And Wonder Woman, Superwoman, for example, I hated skirts growing up. You had to shave your legs, and then I was itchy wearing tights. So I was just like, I want to sit like this. So I'm sorry, guys, I have a crotch hole. But I wanted to sit comfortably, and my mom was always like, legs together. And I was like, sucks being a woman, man. It's just all like, hello, yes. So I very much appreciate now, I'm looking at younger generations and I'm thinking yes to the parents, like, let's make cooler T-shirts for little girls. Let's give little girls skateboards. I was the only girl on my soccer team in France where I grew up because I asked my mum to bully the sports teacher and let me play football because girls didn't play football. So I never really felt like there was a woman out there that was embodying what I felt inside. I found it more in men. So it's always an interesting thing because I get that question a lot, and sometimes I get asked in interviews, how do you feel being an inspiration to women or representing women? And honestly, when I grew up, I didn't feel like I was representing women, because I was touring with a lot of women who didn't write their songs, who weren't playing instruments, who were wearing tutus on stage and going, you know, cool. And that's fine. It's entertainment, and I respected it. I just felt like I related more to people, male or female, who were writing, who were honest, who were bold, who just, you know. So I think, yeah, Tupac, The Clash, Michael Jackson. For me, it's excellence and it's honesty, and that really gets me going. And then to come full circle to your second question, yeah, I mean, we all have our own lens of what we go through, and I really struggled for a long time. And I think owning your vulnerability, and if we all sat in a room and each of us had a turn to come up and take a risk and say something honest. I've done this in improv, and I found it really interesting and very helpful. If I come up and say, okay, and the rule is honesty, and I tell you what's happened to me as a child or as an adult or whatever, people in the audience don't really look at you and think, oh, well, screw you, you weird mangled human. You know, and I say something, I'll get off stage and have a shame kickback. Oh my God, what did I share? But actually what you find is the people watching either relate and they go, oh wow, this person's saying something that's honest, I feel for them. But then you get up here and it's your turn to say something and you're like, oh God, no, I couldn't possibly, but you've just loved these people. So essentially I found that through exposure and going through this a lot, I found that people do express love towards one another when they see what is perceived as a weakness, when the person is expressing it and being truthful about it. And so I decided that it was more important for me to be truthful and own that vulnerability and allow people to relate to it than it was to hide and pretend that everything's okay. And yeah, I mean, of course, there are moments where I'll say, I'm sure I'll walk off the stage tonight and be like, you rambled on like a motherfucker. Gee, and then I'll have a shame kickback for that, you know? You can never remember the question because you talk. But it is what it is. And then the seed is my mother telling me you're too much growing up. So we all have our things. And I think, to quote my mother, life is another school. So I just try and take the lessons and see. I think the thing that keeps me going is everything in life is medicine. If it's bad, I'll learn from it. If it's good, I'll enjoy it and just try and keep my vibration high. But I'm going to hurt. I'm going to go through a breakup. I'm going to feel rejected. I'm going to go through all sorts of things. And yeah, I guess, does that answer the question?
Thing was the Wonder Woman, Bionic Woman, anybody out there that you went, wow, that's cool, or was it a guy like Superman?
Yeah, I think it was Christopher Reeves. And then The Flash. I was really into the thighs and I was really into the outfits. And yeah, I think if the women superheroes, Catwoman was very sexualized. I just didn't click into that sexual. And still, I mean, you know, I'm not like, hey guys, we're gonna do a talk today and it's gonna be awesome. I don't feel that energy, but I felt like the female superheroes for the most part, I think had a bit of that and I couldn't relate. But now, watching the ones which don't have mini skirts, which have, you know, trousers, they can spread their legs comfortably and kick someone in the face with that, you know what I mean? I'm cool with that. So yeah, I would say Christopher Reeves, Superman.
Cool. And I'm just going to add, shameless self-promotion, that Tatiana is about to be a superhero in her own comic book. Because this crazy thing, shameless plug, she's playing at the Whiskey A Go-Go October 13th. Tickets available at Eventbrite. But it's this crazy meeting of our two worlds, because it's the rock star meeting me, who comes from this comic book world, and somehow she went along with this ride with me, and I'm like, I want to bring like a Comic-Con movie premiere vibe to a concert with a red carpet, and I'm like, I want to do an 8-page comic book of you as a superhero, incorporating your lyrics and stuff like that, and she went with it, and so it's a fun sort of thing we're trying.
And every conversation has been, make the t-shirt baggier, make the jeans more torn, make it less sexualized, make it less feminine.
Like, is there something that's her weakness? Like cookies? I don't know.
That's a mystery. Cookies are a weakness. Yeah, that's true. As is McDonald's, but we had some on the way up, so I'm fine. Yeah.
Cool. More
Thank you for your
questions?
question.
We have time for, am I getting a signal that we have time for one more question? Is that what's happening?
Gosh, I'm sorry. I see shame kickback ate up all that time.
One more question?
Okay, it's for Luke or Craig. I've noticed in the film and television, we're getting a lot of reboots, especially in TV, and we're remaking old movies. And I understand that you want some of those great movies to be remade for the new generation so that they can experience them in a fresher way. Is it financially driven by the executives that they're afraid to take risks with new material?
Yes. That's how much the universe hates that. Yes. If you want to give me like 3.5 minutes, I can explain the entire problem.
Yep.
Go. Okay. It starts with Jaws. And I'll go fast. But prior to Jaws, movies rolled out in a very sensible fashion. They would open in big cities, and if they started to work, they would work their way more to like centralized places. And then what happened was Jaws came and Universal said, we're going to open this on as many screens as possible. Everyone went, you're crazy, no one's ever done that. And then it worked. And then everybody else went, well, we should do that too. Which, if you try to go back like pre-Jaws and look at box office grosses, nobody cared because nobody was measuring like opening weekends or how much something made across time, which then began like a different level of competition. So suddenly what used to be marketing spend skyrocketed because now you had like competition directly for every weekend. So suddenly the marketing of movies eventually became more expensive than the making of movies, which is a place we kind of hover around right now. What happens inside of a corporate culture when you command the most overhead is you command the most power, so marketing departments then suddenly started commanding the most power. I remember the first time I made a movie that tested really well, the marketing department was like, oh, that's hard, we'll send it to direct-to-video. I wrote a very Jerry Maguire memo that got me in a lot of trouble, but I was just like, no, like, stay up late, market. And as that happened, like, marketing departments care about two things. They care about awareness and they care about interest. And when you talk about all the reboots in the IP, as much as I would love for it to be that everybody would love that, you know, like, my kids will enjoy Transformers as well, that's not what's happening. What's happening is marketing departments with a lot of power are saying, we're going to do this because we feel like we can sell it, and guys, we know we're not going to make any money if we can't sell it, but we already have awareness, which they assume, which is wrong, because we're doing something that already exists, and therefore half the equation's done, we just need interest. And with that, then they're just kind of going all in on those things. And the other thing that happened was, for a very long time, we made a mistake because of a technological inaccuracy, which is a couple of us in this room are old enough to remember like VHS and Betamax, right? Two competing formats, and eventually one is going to eat the other. What happened, video came in and actually saved Hollywood feature film because movies they had ceased being as profitable as they had been in the movie theaters, and then suddenly like people were buying home video. That was bolstering the sales. And that became actually the most valuable component in getting a movie greenlit. When I was trying to get movies greenlit when I was a studio executive, I had to call the home video guy and like suck up to him. It was his numbers that actually like got me over the edge. And inside of that, what happened then was DVD came along, and DVD and VHS should have fought in the same way as VHS and Betamax. One should have eaten the other, but they didn't. They both just kept selling and selling and selling. And we were all like the people in like the third act of Boogie Nights. We're like, it's going to last forever. And then, you know, it doesn't. So 2008 happened. Global economy crashes, less disposable income, and also like a technological dissonance of now there's Blu-ray. Now there's like whatever the hell other like Ray and Vid and Purple and Violet and other things going on. And everybody was looking at it going like, what do I buy? What do I do? And they just stopped doing it, and that dropped out. And then there wasn't a profit and loss statement inside of Hollywood that looked good anymore. So you had to go back to the marketing department. And they said, well, we have some awareness and we can sell this. And if we could just get people interested, which I'm sure we can do. And so then that goes back to those existing properties and those reboots of things that, like, I have a theory, like, if you have a movie that has like a colon in the title, like, I don't know, like, what about Bob 2? Back to Lake Winnipesaukee. Like, it's like you're reminding somebody of something of a movie because nobody cares anymore, right? So that's honestly what's happening. And I've worked on a couple of movies, you know, which aren't things that like change the world, but like Pacific Rim, when Guillermo del Toro did that, while it was still based on a lot of existing ideas, it was the first movie that cost a lot of money, that was very original in the sense that it wasn't based directly on a book, a comic, another thing. And I had so many hopes riding on that movie working, because then suddenly everybody in town could point to something and go, okay, that highly original thing that cost a lot of money worked. We can go do that now. And I think we're still kind of looking for that. But what I'm trying to do inside of really the diversification of media is accept the fact that there's no media platform right now that's super healthy on its own. You can't really find one. But when they work together, that's when you actually get something like vibrant and strong. So finding ways to like really kind of reinforce like a credible and strong story world with different components to it that all kind of like feed in from a different direction and get more people under the tent, I think that's the answer. Does that? And sorry, that was a quick history of why movies suck.
Any concluding words?
No, just it's great to be back here. Thank you guys all for participating. Thanks for coming out to listen to us talk about what we do and what you all do, and I hope you continue.
Thank you.
Thank you.